The morning sun cast long shadows across Camp Lejeune as Colonel Marcus Steele adjusted his military cap and walked toward the shooting range. At 52 years old, he had spent 30 years in the Marine Corps, earning respect through blood, sweat, and countless missions that most people could never imagine. His weathered face told stories of battles fought in distant lands, and his stern gray eyes had seen things that would break ordinary men. Today was supposed to be a routine day. The annual civilian outreach program brought local families to the base, giving them a chance to see military life up close. Colonel Steele had participated in dozens of these events, watching wide-eyed children marvel at tanks and helicopters, while their parents asked endless questions about military service. It was all part of building community relations, though Steele often found it tiresome. As he approached the outdoor shooting range, he noticed a crowd had already gathered. Sergeant Williams, one of his most trusted NCOs, was setting up targets downrange while a group of civilian visitors watched from behind the safety line. Steele's eyes scanned the crowd, taking note of the usual mix of families, teenagers, and military enthusiasts who always showed up for these demonstrations. That's when he saw her. Standing slightly apart from the main group was a girl who couldn't have been more than 16 years old. She was small for her age, maybe 5 feet 2 inches tall, with shoulder-length brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore faded jeans and a plain blue t-shirt that looked like it had seen better days. What caught Steele's attention wasn't her appearance, but her posture. While everyone else was chattering excitedly and pointing at the equipment, she stood perfectly still. Her dark eyes focused intently on the rifle range. Steele frowned. Something about the girl bothered him, though he couldn't put his finger on what it was. Maybe it was the way she held herself, too calm and composed for someone her age. Or perhaps it was how she seemed to be studying every detail of the range setup with an intensity that seemed unusual for a casual visitor. "Colonel Steele," called out Captain Morrison, the officer in charge of the day's demonstrations. "We're ready to begin the shooting demonstration whenever you give the word." Steele nodded and moved to address the gathered crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Camp Lejeune. Today you'll witness some of the training our Marines go through to become the finest fighting force in the world. We'll start with basic marksmanship using the M4 carbine." As he spoke, Steele noticed the girl had moved closer to the firing line. Her eyes never left the weapons being prepared for the demonstration. There was something almost hungry in her gaze, like a starving person looking at food. "Now," Steele continued, "I want everyone to understand that what you're about to see represents years of intensive training. Our Marines practice thousands of hours to achieve the precision you'll witness today. This isn't something you just pick up and do." Sergeant Williams stepped forward with a pristine M4 carbine. "Sir, weapon is ready for demonstration." Steele took the rifle and moved to the firing position. The targets were set at 100 meters, standard paper targets with concentric rings around a black bullseye. This was basic stuff, the kind of shooting every Marine learned in boot camp, but it was impressive enough for civilians who had never seen military-grade accuracy. Steele fired 5 rounds in quick succession. When the target was retrieved, it showed a tight grouping within the 8 ring with 1 shot in the 9 ring. It was solid shooting, exactly what you'd expect from a career military officer. "Excellent shooting, Colonel," Captain Morrison announced to appreciative murmurs from the crowd. As Steele set the rifle down, he heard a small voice from the crowd. "Excuse me, sir." He turned to see the young girl had raised her hand tentatively. Up close, he could see she was even younger than he'd first thought, with a face that still held traces of childhood softness despite the mature intensity in her eyes. "Yes, miss," Steele replied, his tone polite but slightly impatient. "Could I try shooting, please?" she asked quietly. The question hung in the air for a moment. Steele blinked, certain he had misheard. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" "I asked if I could try shooting," the girl repeated, her voice steady despite the attention now focused on her. A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. Steele himself felt a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. It was cute, really, this slip of a girl thinking she could handle a military rifle. He'd seen grown men struggle with the M4's recoil, and this child probably weighed less than the rifle itself. "Young lady," Steele said in what he hoped was a gentle but firm tone, "this isn't a toy. These are serious weapons that require extensive training to use safely and effectively. Perhaps you'd be interested in seeing our communications equipment instead." The girl's face flushed slightly. but her voice remained steady. I understand it's not a toy, sir. I've been shooting since I was 8 years old. I know how to handle firearms safely. Now Steele did smile, though there was no warmth in it. Backyard plinking with a .22 rifle was a far cry from military precision shooting. He'd seen this before, civilian enthusiasts who thought their weekend hobby qualified them to understand real marksmanship. Miss, I'm sure you've had some experience with hunting rifles or target shooting with your father, Steele said, his tone taking on a patronizing edge he didn't quite intend. But military weapons and military standards are entirely different. The M4 carbine isn't something you just pick up and shoot accurately. I'd still like to try, if it's allowed, the girl persisted. Steele looked around at the crowd, many of whom were now watching this exchange with amusement. He could see parents smiling indulgently at what they clearly thought was a child's naive request. Even his own Marines seemed to find the situation entertaining. Sir, Captain Morrison whispered, we probably shouldn't. Steele waved him off. An idea was forming in his mind. This could actually be a perfect teaching moment, a way to demonstrate the real difference between civilian assumptions and military reality. Let the girl try and fail, and everyone would have a clear understanding of what it really took to be a Marine. You know what? Steele said, his voice carrying across the range. Why don't we let our young marksman here give it a try? But let's make it interesting. He gestured toward the targets downrange. Those targets are set at 100 meters for our standard demonstration. But since you seem confident in your abilities, miss, let's see what you can do at 200 meters. There were audible gasps from the crowd. Even some of the Marines looked surprised. 200 meters with iron sights was challenging shooting for trained soldiers, let alone a teenage girl. The girl looked at the distant targets, then back at Steele. For the first time, he saw something flicker in her eyes. Not fear or uncertainty, but something else entirely, something that made him suddenly, inexplicably uneasy. 200 meters would be fine, sir, she said simply. The shooting range fell into an expectant hush as Sergeant Williams moved to reset the targets at 200 meters. Colonel Steele watched the girl carefully, waiting for her to show some sign of nervousness or second thoughts. Most people would have backed down by now, realizing they were in over their heads, but she just stood there, hands clasped behind her back, watching the target set up with the same intense focus she'd shown since arriving. What's your name, young lady? Steele asked, partly out of courtesy and partly because he was genuinely curious about this strange, quiet girl who seemed so unaffected by the pressure of the situation. Emma Chen. Sir? She replied without taking her eyes off the targets. And how old are you, Miss Chen? 16, sir, Steele nodded. Just as he'd guessed. At 16, he'd been thinking about cars and girls and weekend plans, not military marksmanship. This whole situation was becoming more surreal by the minute. Captain Morrison approached Steele and spoke in a low voice. Sir, are we really going to let a civilian miner handle military weapons? The liability issues alone— Relax, Captain, Steele interrupted. We'll follow all safety protocols. And frankly, this will be a good reality check for everyone here. Sometimes people need to understand that what we do isn't as easy as it looks in movies. Steele had seen this scenario play out dozens of times over his career. Overconfident civilians who thought military training was just playing with big guns. They'd fire a few rounds, miss the target completely, and walk away with a new appreciation for what real soldiers could do. It was actually better this way than just talking about it. Sergeant Williams jogged back from the 200-meter line. Targets are set, sir. Steele looked at Emma. She had moved closer to the firing line and was now examining the M4 carbine with careful attention. She didn't touch it, but her eyes traced every detail of the weapon's construction. Again, Steele felt that strange unease. There was something about the way she looked at the rifle, like she was reacquainting herself with an old friend rather than seeing it for the first time. Miss Chen, Steele called out, before we begin, let me explain the weapon you'll be using. This is the M4 carbine, the standard infantry weapon of the United States military. It fires 5.56 mm NATO ammunition at a muzzle velocity of approximately 3,000 feet per second. The weapon weighs 6.5 pounds empty and has an effective range of 500 meters for a trained marksman. Emma nodded politely as he spoke, but Steele got the distinct impression she wasn't really listening. It was as if she already knew everything he was telling her. The targets you'll be engaging are standard silhouette targets at 200 meters, Steele continued. For perspective, Most civilian shooters would struggle to hit the target at all at this distance, let alone achieve any meaningful accuracy. I understand, sir, Emma said simply. Steele gestured to Sergeant Williams, who handed Emma a pair of safety glasses and ear protection. She put them on without comment, then looked expectantly at the rifle. Now, Miss Chen, Steele said, adopting his instructor voice, I'm going to show you the basic firing position. This is called the prone position, which provides the most stable platform for accurate shooting. He knelt down and demonstrated the proper prone position, showing how to position the body, where to place the elbows, and how to achieve a proper sight picture. Emma watched attentively, nodding at appropriate moments. The key to accuracy, Steele explained as he stood up, is breath control, trigger squeeze, and follow-through. You'll want to take a deep breath, let half of it out. Then hold while you squeeze the trigger straight back with the pad of your index finger. Yes, sir? Emma replied. Steele picked up the loaded M4 and held it out to her. Remember, keep the weapon pointed downrange at all times. Your first priority is safety, not accuracy. Emma took the rifle, and Steele immediately noticed something that made him frown. Instead of the awkward fumbling he expected from someone unfamiliar with the weapon, she handled it with natural ease. Her grip was correct, her finger positioning proper, and she kept the muzzle pointed safely downrange without being reminded. Have you handled an M4 before, Miss Chen? Steele asked, suspicion creeping into his voice. No, sir, Emma replied, but the fundamentals are the same regardless of the rifle. Steele wasn't sure what to make of that answer. He watched as Emma moved to the firing line and knelt down to assume the prone position. Again, he was struck by how natural her movement seemed. She positioned herself exactly as he had demonstrated, with textbook form that many of his new recruits took weeks to master. Take your time, Steele called out. Remember, this isn't a race. Focus on making each shot count. Emma nodded and brought the rifle to her shoulder. Steele watched as she adjusted her position slightly, settling into what looked like a comfortable, stable platform. She peered through the iron sights, making tiny adjustments to her aim. The crowd had grown quiet, everyone straining to see what would happen. Steele could sense the mixture of curiosity and skepticism from the onlookers. They were all waiting to see the inevitable miss, the reality check that would put this situation back into perspective. Whenever you're ready, Miss Chen, Steele announced. Emma took a breath, then settled behind the rifle. Steele watched her finger move to the trigger, saw her take up the slack in the trigger pull. Her breathing slowed, became more controlled. Then she fired. The sharp crack of the M4 echoed across the range. Steele immediately looked downrange toward the 200-meter target through his binoculars. For a moment, he couldn't see any impact point. Then his vision focused on the target, and his stomach dropped. There was a clean hole in the 9 ring just slightly off-center. Steele blinked and looked again, certain he must be seeing things wrong. But the hole was definitely there. A perfect 5.56mm puncture in the white scoring ring surrounding the bullseye. Good shot, Sergeant Williams called out, though his voice carried a note of surprise. Steele lowered his binoculars and looked at Emma. She had already cycled the bolt and was settling in for her second shot. Her face showed no emotion, no excitement or surprise at her success. She looked like she had expected nothing less. That was lucky, Steele muttered, though he wasn't entirely sure who he was trying to convince. Emma fired again. Another crack, another hole in the target. This one was in the 10 ring, even closer to the bullseye. Steele raised his binoculars again, his hands trembling slightly. 2 good shots could still be luck. Beginner's luck was a real phenomenon, especially when someone was relaxed and not overthinking things. The 3rd shot rang out before Steele could lower his binoculars. Through the magnified image, he watched a 3rd hole appear in the target, this one dead center in the 10 ring. The crowd behind him had gone completely silent. Even the Marines who had been chatting quietly among themselves had stopped talking. Steele could feel their attention focused on the small figure lying prone at the firing line. Emma fired the 4th shot with the same methodical precision as the others. Steele watched the bullet impact exactly where the previous shot had hit, enlarging the hole in the center of the target but maintaining perfect placement. Jesus, whispered Captain Morrison, who had moved up beside Steele with his own binoculars. Steele's mouth had gone dry. 4 shots, 4 perfect hits. This wasn't luck anymore. This was skill. The kind of skill that took years to develop. The kind of skill that Steele himself had spent decades perfecting. Emma chambered her final round and took aim for the fifth shot. Steele found himself holding his breath, waiting to see what would happen. Part of him was hoping she would miss, that this strange demonstration would end with at least some validation of his expectations. The final shot cracked across the range. Through his binoculars, Steele watched the fifth bullet tear through the exact same hole as the previous shots, creating what appeared to be a single, slightly enlarged puncture in the dead center of the target. Emma set the rifle down, engaged the safety, and stood up. She turned to face Steele with the same calm expression she'd worn throughout the entire ordeal. "Is that acceptable, sir?" she asked quietly. Steele stared at her, his mind struggling to process what he had just witnessed. A 16-year-old girl had just outshot most of his Marines, using a weapon she claimed never to have fired before, at a distance that challenged even experienced marksmen. For the first time in 30 years of military service, Colonel Marcus Steele was completely speechless. The silence stretched across the shooting range like a taut wire. Colonel Steele stared at Emma Chen, then at the target downrange where 5 bullets had essentially created one ragged hole in the dead center of the bullseye. His 30 years of military experience had taught him to assess threats quickly and accurately, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. Behind him, the civilian crowd was beginning to murmur in amazement. Steele could hear fragments of conversation. "Did you see that? 5 shots in the same hole. How is that even possible?" But it was the reaction of his own Marines that troubled him more. They stood in stunned silence, their professional composure cracked by what they had just witnessed. "Sergeant Williams," Steele called out, his voice hoarser than he intended. "Retrieve that target." As Williams jogged down range, Steele turned back to Emma. She had removed her ear protection and safety glasses and was standing at ease beside the rifle, as if what had just happened was the most natural thing in the world. "Miss Chen," Steele began, then stopped. He wasn't sure what question to ask first. "Where exactly did you learn to shoot?" "My grandfather taught me, sir," Emma replied simply. "He started training me when I was 8. "Your grandfather," Steele repeated slowly. "What branch did he serve in?" Something flickered in Emma's eyes. "He didn't serve in the American military, sir." Before Steele could ask what that meant, Sergeant Williams returned with the target. He held it up for everyone to see, and there were audible gasps from the crowd. The 5 shots had indeed created what appeared to be a single hole, with slight enlargement indicating multiple hits in exactly the same spot. Captain Morrison took the target and examined it closely. "Sir," he said quietly, "this is better than anything I've seen outside of our designated marksman course. And most of those guys have been shooting professionally for years." Steele felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. This wasn't just good shooting. This was exceptional shooting. Championship-level shooting. The kind of precision that required not just natural talent but extensive professional-grade training. "Miss Chen," Steele said carefully, "exactly how much shooting experience do you have?" Emma was quiet for a moment, as if considering how much to reveal. "I practice regularly, sir. Several hours most days." "Several hours most days," Steele repeated. "And what kind of rifles do you practice with?" "Different kinds," Emma said vaguely. "Whatever's available." Steele was getting increasingly frustrated with her evasive answers, but before he could press further, one of the Marines spoke up. "Sir," called out Corporal Jenkins, a young Marine with 3 tours under his belt. "If she's that good with iron sights at 200 meters, what could she do with a scope?" The suggestion hung in the air. Steele could see where this was leading, and part of him wanted to shut it down immediately. But another part, the competitive part that had driven him through decades of military service, was curious to see just how far this girl's abilities extended. "Miss Chen," Steele said slowly, "would you be interested in trying a more challenging shot?" "What did you have in mind, sir?" Emma asked. Steele looked downrange, his mind calculating possibilities. The range extended to 500 meters, but that would be pushing it for a demonstration with civilian observers. However, there was another option that would test her abilities without requiring extreme distance. "Sergeant Williams," Steele commanded, "set up 3 targets at 300 meters, standard silhouettes but space them 10 meters apart." Williams looked surprised but nodded and headed back downrange with fresh targets. Steele turned to Captain Morrison. "Get me the M24 SWS with the Leopold scope." Morrison's eyes widened. The M24 sniper weapon system was not typically part of civilian demonstrations. It was a precision instrument used by Marine scout snipers, capable of accurate shots well beyond 800 meters in the right hands. "Sir, are you sure?" Morrison began. "Get the rifle." "Captain," Steele ordered. As Morrison headed to the weapons rack, Steele addressed Emma again. "Miss Chen, what we're going to do now is significantly more challenging. 3 targets at 300 meters, spaced apart so you'll need to adjust your aim between shots. You'll be using a bolt-action sniper rifle with a telescopic sight. Are you familiar with that type of weapon?" "Yes, sir," Emma said simply. "The scoring will be different too," Steele continued, his voice taking on a more formal tone. "To qualify as expert marksman with the M24 at that distance, you need to place all 3 shots within the 10 ring. That's approximately a 4-inch circle at 300 meters. Miss the 10 ring on any target and you fail the qualification." Emma nodded. "I understand, sir." Steele studied her face, looking for any sign of nervousness or second thoughts. He found none. If anything, she seemed more relaxed now than she had before the first demonstration. Captain Morrison returned with the M24, a sleek bolt-action rifle topped with a high-powered scope. It was a different animal entirely from the M4, requiring a completely different shooting technique and a much more intimate understanding of ballistics and wind compensation. "This weapon fires 7.62 mm NATO ammunition," Steele explained as Emma examined the rifle. "It's heavier than the M4 with more recoil, and the bolt action requires you to manually cycle between shots. The scope is zeroed for 300 meters, but you'll need to account for any wind drift." Emma accepted the rifle and immediately began checking it over with practiced efficiency. She examined the scope settings, tested the bolt action, and checked the safety mechanism. Her movements were quick, confident, and completely professional. Steele felt that cold knot in his stomach tighten. This wasn't the behavior of a recreational shooter or even an accomplished civilian marksman. This was the methodical weapon inspection of someone with serious training. "Miss Chen," Steele said carefully, "before we continue, I need to ask you something directly. Have you received any formal military or law enforcement training?" Emma looked up from the rifle. "No, sir. Nothing official." The way she emphasized official made Steele's unease deepen. But before he could pursue the question further, Sergeant Williams signaled that the targets were ready. "Whenever you're ready, Miss Chen," Steele announced to the gathered crowd. 3 targets, 3 shots, all must be within the 10 ring to qualify." Emma moved to the firing line and knelt down. But instead of assuming the prone position, she remained kneeling and brought the rifle to her shoulder. Steele was about to correct her when he realized she was setting up for a more challenging shooting position. Kneeling was less stable than prone but allowed for quicker target transitions. "Sir," whispered Captain Morrison, "should we stop this? If word gets out that a civilian teenager outshot our Marines with military weapons..." Steele considered it. Morrison was right that this situation could become embarrassing for the unit. But Steele was now too curious about Emma Chen's true abilities to back down. Something was driving him forward. A need to understand who this girl really was and where her skills came from. "Let her shoot," Steele said quietly. Emma settled behind the rifle and peered through the scope. She made small adjustments to her position, then focused on the leftmost target. The range fell silent again, everyone straining to see what would happen next. Through his binoculars, Steele watched Emma's first shot impact dead center of the left target's 10 ring. She smoothly worked the bolt action, ejecting the spent cartridge and chambering a fresh round. Her movement to the second target was fluid and controlled. The second shot rang out. Another perfect 10 ring hit on the center target. Emma cycled the bolt again and swung to the rightmost target. Steele found himself holding his breath as she took aim for the final shot. Everything about her technique was textbook perfect, better than textbook even. It was the kind of shooting that spoke of countless hours of practice and professional instruction. The third shot echoed across the range. Through his binoculars, Steele watched the bullet punch through the exact center of the right target's 10 ring. 3 shots, 3 perfect 10s, at 300 meters, with target transitions, using a weapon she claimed never to have fired before. As Emma set the rifle down and stood up, Steele realized that his initial assessment had been completely wrong. This wasn't some overconfident teenager who needed a reality check. This was someone with skills that matched or exceeded those of his best Marines, and he had absolutely no idea who she really was. Colonel Steele felt the world shift slightly under his feet as he stared at the 3 perfect shots Emma had just placed. The crowd behind him was buzzing with excitement and disbelief, but Steele barely heard them. His mind was racing, trying to process what he had witnessed and figure out what to do next. "Sir," Captain Morrison approached cautiously. "Should we conclude the demonstration?" Steele looked at Morrison, then back at Emma, who stood quietly beside the M24 rifle with the same calm expression she'd maintained throughout the entire ordeal. Something inside Steele rebelled against ending this now. His professional pride was stinging, but more than that, his curiosity was burning like a fever. "Miss Chen," Steele said, his voice carrying across the range. "Those were excellent shots. In fact, they were better than excellent." He paused, studying her face for any reaction. "But I'm wondering how you might perform under more realistic conditions." Emma tilted her head slightly. "What do you mean, sir?" Steele made a decision that he would later realize changed everything. "I mean moving targets, time pressure, multiple objectives, the kind of challenges our special operations personnel face." A murmur went through the crowd of Marines. Even Captain Morrison looked surprised. Steele was venturing into territory that was usually reserved for advanced training exercises, not civilian demonstrations. "Sergeant Williams," Steele called out, "set up the reactive target course, standard SEAL qualification layout." Williams hesitated. "Sir, the reactive course? I know what it is, Sergeant." Steele cut him off. "Set it up." As Williams and 2 other Marines began arranging a complex series of pop-up targets, steel plates, and moving mechanisms, Steele turned back to Emma. "Miss Chen, what I'm setting up is a course we use to test our most elite personnel. It involves multiple targets appearing at different times and distances, some stationary, some moving. You'll have a limited time window to engage each target before it disappears. The current base record for this course is held by a Navy SEAL who scored 94 out of 100 possible points." Emma listened without comment, but Steele noticed her eyes tracking the target setup with keen interest. "The course requires not just marksmanship," Steele continued, "but tactical thinking, speed, and the ability to prioritize targets under pressure. Most Marines fail it on their first attempt. Even experienced special operations personnel often need multiple tries to achieve a passing score." "What's the passing score?" Emma asked. 70%, Steele replied. "But as I mentioned, the record is 94. That SEAL had over a decade of combat experience and had run the course dozens of times." Steele expected some sign of intimidation or second thoughts. Instead, Emma simply nodded. "I'd like to try it, sir." The setup took another 10 minutes. When it was complete, the range had been transformed into a complex training environment. Targets were positioned at distances ranging from 50 to 400 meters, some partially concealed behind obstacles, others mounted on mechanisms that would make them move when activated. "Here's how it works," Steele explained as he handed Emma a loaded M4 with a holographic sight. "You'll have 60 seconds to engage as many targets as possible. Each target has a point value based on distance and difficulty. The targets will pop up in random sequence, and you only have a few seconds to engage each one before it drops back down." Emma examined the rifle, checking the sight alignment and testing the feel of the weapon. Her movements were economical and professional. "Some targets represent hostiles, others represent non-combatants," Steele continued. "Hit a hostile target, you gain points. Hit a non-combatant, you lose points. Miss a hostile target, no points awarded or deducted." "How do I tell the difference?" Emma asked. "Hostile targets are red, non-combatants are blue. But you'll need to make that determination quickly." Steele gestured to a small elevated platform that provided the best view of the course. "You'll shoot from there. Questions?" Emma shook her head and moved to the platform. She settled into a comfortable shooting stance, rifle ready but not aimed at any particular target. "Begin!" Steele shouted. Immediately, 3 targets popped up at different locations. Emma's rifle snapped to the closest one, a red silhouette at 100 meters. The shot rang out and the target dropped, indicating a hit. Without pausing, she swung to the second target, fired, hit, then engaged the third. 3 targets down in less than 5 seconds. Steele watched through his binoculars, calling out hits and misses to Captain Morrison, who was keeping score. But as the seconds ticked by, Steele realized he wasn't calling out any misses. Emma was hitting everything she aimed at. More targets appeared. A moving red silhouette crossed from left to right at 200 meters. Emma led it perfectly, fired once and dropped it. A blue non-combatant popped up mixed among two red targets. Emma engaged both red targets while completely ignoring the blue one. "How many hits so far?" Steele called out to Morrison. 12 for 12, sir," Morrison replied, his voice tight with amazement. The course was only halfway through. More complex scenarios began activating. Multiple targets at varying distances, some partially concealed, others appearing for only brief moments. Emma moved through them with mechanical precision, her rifle seeming to find each target automatically. At the 30-second mark, one of the most difficult scenarios activated. 5 targets popped up simultaneously at different distances and angles with a blue non-combatant positioned directly between 2 red hostiles. It was designed to test not just shooting ability, but decision-making under extreme time pressure. Emma paused for just a split second, seeming to process the entire scenario at once. Then her rifle began to move in a controlled arc, engaging each red target in order of priority while carefully avoiding the blue one. 5 shots in rapid succession, 5 red targets down. Steele's mouth had gone completely dry. This wasn't just good shooting anymore. This was something beyond good. This was the kind of performance that existed in the realm of legend and military folklore. The final 30 seconds brought the most challenging targets. Long-range shots, moving targets, targets that appeared for only seconds before disappearing. Emma handled them all with the same calm efficiency she had shown throughout. "Time!" Steele called out. The range fell silent except for the ringing echoes of the final gunshots. Emma lowered her rifle and engaged the safety, then turned to face Steele with that same unreadable expression. "Well?" she asked simply. Captain Morrison was frantically tallying scores on his clipboard. His face had gone pale as he calculated the results. "Sir," Morrison said quietly, "I need to double-check these numbers." "What's the score, Captain?" Steele demanded. Morrison looked up from his clipboard, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Sir, assuming I counted correctly, she scored 98 out of 100 possible points." Steele felt the world spin around him. "That's impossible. Check again." Morrison ran through his numbers once more, his finger tracing each mark on the paper. "Sir, I've checked 3 times. 98 points. She beat the SEAL record by 4 points. Steele stared at Emma, who seemed unsurprised by the result. Behind him, he could hear the crowd of civilians and Marines talking excitedly, but their voices seemed to come from very far away. "Miss Chen," Steele said, his voice barely above a whisper, "Who are you?" For the first time since he had met her, Emma's calm facade cracked slightly. Something passed across her face, a moment of uncertainty or perhaps sadness. "I'm just a girl who learned to shoot, sir," she said quietly. But Steele knew that wasn't the whole truth. Nobody just learned to shoot like this. This level of skill didn't come from weekend practice or even intensive civilian training. This was military-grade precision, special operations-level performance, and somehow a 16-year-old girl had just displayed it better than any soldier Steele had ever seen. "Miss Chen," Steele said carefully, "I think you and I need to have a longer conversation." In private, Emma nodded slowly. "Yes, sir, I think we do." Colonel Steele's office was Spartan, decorated only with commendations, unit photographs, and a flag that had flown over his last deployment in Afghanistan. Emma sat in the chair across from his desk, her hands folded in her lap, looking smaller somehow in the institutional setting than she had on the firing range. But her eyes still held that same intense focus that had unsettled Steele from the beginning. Steele closed the door and moved to his desk, but didn't sit down immediately. Instead, he stood looking out the window at the base grounds, trying to organize his thoughts. In 30 years of military service, he had never encountered anything like what had just happened. "Miss Chen," he began, turning to face her, "I'm going to be direct with you. What I witnessed on that range today is impossible unless you have received professional military training. And I don't mean basic military training. I mean advanced special operations training." Emma remained silent, her expression unreadable. "A 98 on the reactive course," Steele continued, beginning to pace behind his desk. Do you understand what that means? Navy SEALs train for years to achieve scores in that range. Delta Force operators, Marine Force Recon, the most elite soldiers in the world consider a score in the 90s to be exceptional. Steele stopped pacing and fixed Emma with a stare. So I'm going to ask you again, and this time I need the truth. Who trained you? Emma was quiet for a long moment, her eyes focused on something beyond Steele's shoulder. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than it had been on the range. My grandfather, she said simply. Your grandfather, Steele repeated. The one who didn't serve in the American military. That's correct, sir. Steele sat down heavily in his chair. Emma, I need you to understand something. I'm not asking these questions to embarrass you or because I don't believe you deserve recognition for what you accomplished today. I'm asking because what I saw raises serious questions about national security. Emma's eyes snapped to his face. National security? A 16-year-old girl doesn't develop those skills in a vacuum, Steele explained. That level of training requires resources, equipment, expertise, and a very specific type of instruction. So either you're lying about your background, or there's something happening that I need to understand. Steele leaned forward in his chair. Emma, are you in any kind of trouble? Do you need protection? For the first time since he had met her, Emma showed genuine emotion. Her carefully controlled facade cracked, and Steele saw something that looked like pain flash across her face. No, sir, she said quietly. I'm not in trouble. Then help me understand, Steele said gently. Who was your grandfather? What kind of training did he give you? Emma was silent for several minutes, clearly struggling with some internal conflict. Finally, she looked up at Steele with eyes that seemed much older than her 16 years. My grandfather was Chen Wei, she said. He was a sniper instructor in the People's Liberation Army Special Forces before he defected to the United States in 1989. Steele felt his blood run cold. PLA Special Forces? Yes, sir. He was considered one of the best marksmen in China before he escaped during the political upheaval. He brought my grandmother and my father with him when he defected. Steele's mind raced through the implications. A Chinese Special Forces instructor, training his granddaughter in advanced military tactics on American soil. The potential security concerns were staggering. Emma, Steele said carefully, why are you telling me this now? Because, Emma replied, I think you're an honorable man and because I'm tired of hiding what I can do. Hiding from whom? Emma looked down at her hands. My grandfather made me promise to never reveal my abilities unless it was absolutely necessary. He said that people would either try to use me or see me as a threat. Steele studied her face. And is it absolutely necessary now? Emma was quiet for a moment. I think so, sir. I turn 18 in 6 months. I've been trying to figure out what to do with my life, what to do with the skills my grandfather taught me. When I saw the demonstration today, when I heard you talking about Marines and what they could accomplish, I thought maybe this was my answer. Steele felt a chill run down his spine. What are you saying, Emma? I'm saying I want to serve, sir. I want to use what I can do for something worthwhile. Steele leaned back in his chair, his mind struggling to process everything he had learned. A Chinese defector's granddaughter, trained from childhood in advanced military tactics, wanting to join the American military. The situation was unprecedented and potentially explosive. Emma, Steele said slowly, I need you to understand that this changes everything. If what you're telling me is true, there are going to be investigations, background checks, security reviews. Your life is going to be turned upside down. I know, Emma said simply. Your family will be investigated. Your grandfather, your parents, everyone you've ever known. The government doesn't take these things lightly. My grandfather is dead, Emma said quietly. He died 2 years ago. Cancer. My parents know about my training, but they've never been involved in anything political or military. Steele nodded slowly. What exactly did your grandfather teach you? Everything, Emma replied. Marksmanship, fieldcraft, hand-to-hand combat, tactical planning, weapon systems, demolitions, surveillance, counter-surveillance. She paused. He said I was the best student he ever had. Steele felt his world tilt again. The girl sitting across from him wasn't just an exceptional marksman. She was, according to her own account, a fully trained special operations soldier. Emma, Steele said carefully, why didn't your grandfather serve in the American military after he defected? He tried, Emma replied. But the Pentagon didn't trust him. They gave him a pension and let him live quietly, but they never gave him a chance to serve again. He said it was the greatest regret of his life. Steele understood. The Cold War mentality of the late 1980s would have made it impossible for a Chinese defector to gain the trust necessary for military service, regardless of his skills or loyalty. So he trained you instead, Steele said. He said I was his legacy, Emma replied. His chance to contribute something to the country that gave our family freedom. Steele stood up and walked to the window again. Outside, he could see Marines going through their daily training routines. Normal Marines with normal skills and normal backgrounds. Nothing like the extraordinary young woman sitting in his office. Emma, Steele said without turning around, what you accomplished today will be reported up the chain of command. Within 24 hours, people much higher than me are going to know about you. Once that happens, this situation will be out of my hands. I understand, sir. Steele turned back to face her. Are you prepared for what that might mean? Interrogations, polygraph tests, psychological evaluations? They're going to want to know everything about you, your family, your grandfather's contacts, everything. Yes, sir. And you still want to serve? Emma met his eyes directly. More than anything, sir. Steele studied her face, looking for any sign of deception or uncertainty. He found none. What he saw instead was a young woman who had been carrying an enormous secret and was finally ready to reveal it. All right, Steele said, moving back to his desk. I'm going to make some phone calls. But Emma, once I do this, there's no going back. I know, Emma said. Thank you, sir. As Steele reached for his phone, he couldn't help but wonder what he was setting in motion. The girl who had walked onto his firing range that morning as an unknown civilian was about to become something else entirely. Something that might change everything. The Pentagon's reaction was swift and decisive. Within 6 hours of Steele's phone call, Emma Chen was sitting in a secure facility at Quantico, surrounded by federal agents, military intelligence officers, and security specialists who looked like they hadn't slept in days. The small conference room felt crowded with all the attention focused on one 16-year-old girl. Agent Sarah Mitchell from the FBI's National Security Branch led the questioning. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun. Across from her sat Colonel Steele, who had been asked to participate as the officer who had discovered Emma's abilities. Miss Chen, Agent Mitchell began, opening a thick folder. We've spent the last several hours verifying your story. Your grandfather, Chen Wei, was indeed a member of PLA Special Forces who defected in 1989. Our records show he was granted asylum and eventually citizenship. Emma nodded but remained silent. What our records don't show, Mitchell continued, is any indication that he continued military activities after his defection. Yet you claim he trained you extensively in advanced combat techniques. He did train me, Emma replied calmly. Why? Asked Major Harrison, a military intelligence officer sitting to Mitchell's left. Why would a man who had been given sanctuary and a new life risk everything to train his granddaughter in military skills? Emma considered the question. He said the skills were too valuable to die with him. He said that America had given our family freedom, and that maybe someday I could use what he taught me to protect that freedom for others. And you never questioned this reasoning? Mitchell asked. Never wondered if there might be other motives? What other motives would there be? Emma asked. Colonel Steele watched the exchange with growing unease. The agents were treating Emma like a potential security threat, rather than a patriotic young American who wanted to serve her country. But he understood their caution. The situation was unprecedented and potentially dangerous. Miss Chen, Mitchell said, we're going to need to verify your abilities. The claims made by Colonel Steele are frankly difficult to believe. What do you want me to do? Emma asked. Major Harrison slid a folder across the table. We've arranged for a comprehensive evaluation. Marksmanship, tactical knowledge, physical conditioning, psychological assessment. The works. Emma opened the folder and scanned the contents. This looks like a special operations assessment course. It is, Harrison replied. We want to know exactly what your grandfather taught you and how well you learned it. Steele felt compelled to speak up. Agent Mitchell, I want to emphasize that Miss Chen approached us voluntarily. She revealed her abilities and background of her own free will. That suggests good intentions, Mitchell nodded. We appreciate that, Colonel. But we need to be thorough. The security implications are significant. Over the next 3 days, Emma was put through the most comprehensive evaluation any candidate had ever received. The testing took place at a classified facility in Virginia, with observers from multiple agencies monitoring every aspect of her performance. The marksmanship evaluation came first. Emma was tested with every weapon system in the American arsenal, from pistols to heavy machine guns. She demonstrated proficiency with weapons she claimed never to have fired before, adapting to new systems with remarkable speed. The tactical knowledge assessment was more complex. Emma was given scenarios involving hostage rescue, reconnaissance missions, and assault operations. She developed detailed plans that impressed even the most experienced special operations veterans who reviewed them. The physical conditioning tests revealed that despite her small stature, Emma possessed strength, endurance, and agility that rivaled male special operations candidates. Her scores placed her in the top percentile of all military personnel, but it was the psychological evaluation that provided the most insights. Dr. Robert Chen, a psychiatrist specializing in military mental health, spent hours interviewing Emma about her motivations, her grandfather's training methods, and her understanding of what military service entailed. "She's remarkably well-adjusted for someone with her background," Dr. Chen reported to the assembled officials. "No signs of radicalization, extremist ideology, or psychological instability. Her desire to serve appears genuine and stems from a deep sense of gratitude to the United States." "What about her grandfather's influence?" Agent Mitchell asked. "Could there be hidden conditioning or programming?" "I don't believe so," Dr. Chen replied. "Her memories of her grandfather are those of a loving family relationship. The training appears to have been conducted as a way of bonding and passing on skills, not as preparation for any specific mission or agenda." Colonel Steele, who had been observing the evaluations, was amazed by Emma's performance. Every test confirmed what he had witnessed on his firing range, but on a much larger scale. Emma wasn't just an exceptional marksman. She was a complete special operations professional. On the third day, Steele was present when Emma demonstrated her hand-to-hand combat abilities. Facing off against a Marine Corps martial arts instructor who outweighed her by 80 pounds, Emma neutralized him in less than 30 seconds, using techniques that the observing experts couldn't immediately identify. Where did those moves come from? Major Harrison asked the Chinese military attaché who had been brought in as a cultural consultant. They appeared to be a combination of traditional Chinese martial arts and modern military combatives, the attaché replied. Highly effective and very advanced. As the evaluations concluded, Steele found himself in an unusual position. He had started this process simply trying to understand who Emma Chen really was. Now he was becoming her advocate, defending her intentions and abilities to skeptical intelligence officials. "The question," Agent Mitchell said during the final briefing, "is what to do with her." "What do you mean?" Steele asked. "Miss Chen possesses skills that our own special operations personnel take years to develop. She's essentially a fully trained operator with no institutional loyalty or oversight. That makes her valuable but also potentially dangerous." "She wants to serve," Steele pointed out. "She's asked to join the military. And if we allow that," Mitchell replied, "we set a precedent. What happens the next time someone shows up with unexplained military training? How do we know this isn't part of a larger pattern?" Major Harrison leaned forward. "There's also the question of her effectiveness. Miss Chen's abilities are so advanced that she would be wasted in conventional military roles. But special operations units have very specific culture and team dynamics. Integrating someone with her background could be challenging." Steele felt frustration building. "So what are you suggesting? That we ignore her abilities and tell her to go home?" "We're suggesting," Mitchell said carefully, "that we need to find a way to utilize her skills while maintaining appropriate security and oversight." "Which means what exactly?" Mitchell closed her folder. "It means, Colonel, that Miss Chen's future is going to be decided by people much higher than any of us in this room." Steele looked through the observation window at Emma, who was sitting quietly in the debriefing room, waiting to learn her fate. She had revealed her extraordinary abilities in a gesture of patriotic service, and now the very government she wanted to serve was struggling to decide whether she was an asset or a threat. "Agent Mitchell," Steele said quietly, "I hope those people remember that she came to us willingly. That has to count for something." Mitchell nodded. "I hope so too, Colonel. For all our sakes." 6 weeks after Emma Chen had first stepped onto Colonel Steele's firing range, she found herself sitting in the Pentagon's most secure briefing room. The walls were lined with flags representing every branch of the American military, and the table was surrounded by some of the highest-ranking officers in the country. At the head of the table sat General Patricia Hawkins, the first female Marine Corps commandant, whose steel-gray eyes seemed to see straight through to a person's soul. Emma had been through 6 weeks of the most intensive scrutiny any military candidate had ever faced. Background investigators had interviewed every teacher she'd ever had, every neighbor who had known her family, every person who could provide insight into her character and motivations. Polygraph experts had questioned her for hours about her grandfather's training methods and her own intentions. Psychiatrists had probed every aspect of her psychological profile. Through it all, Emma had remained consistent in her story and unwavering in her desire to serve. Now finally, the decision-makers were ready to reveal their conclusion. Colonel Steele sat at the far end of the table, having been asked to attend as the officer who had discovered Emma's abilities. Over the past 6 weeks, he had found himself becoming increasingly invested in her future. The more he learned about her background and character, the more convinced he became that America would be making a serious mistake if it failed to utilize her extraordinary talents. "Miss Chen," General Hawkins began, her voice carrying the authority of decades of command, "what you've been through over the past 6 weeks represents the most thorough vetting process any military candidate has ever received. I want you to understand that this level of scrutiny was not meant to punish you, but to protect both you and the interests of national security." Emma nodded. "I understand, General. Your test scores," Hawkins continued, glancing at a folder in front of her, "are unprecedented. Your marksmanship abilities exceed those of our most experienced snipers. Your tactical knowledge rivals that of officers with decades of experience. Your physical conditioning meets or exceeds the standards for our most elite units." Steele watched Emma's face carefully. She showed no emotion at the praise, maintaining the same calm composure she had displayed from the beginning. "However," General Hawkins said, and Steele felt his stomach tighten, "your background presents unique challenges. Never before have we encountered someone with advanced military training from a foreign source who seeks to serve in the American military." "General," Steele found himself speaking before he had consciously decided to, "I'd like to emphasize again that Miss Chen came to us voluntarily. She revealed her abilities and background of her own accord. That demonstrates both honesty and patriotic intention." General Hawkins looked at Steele with what might have been approval. "Colonel Steele, your advocacy for Miss Chen has been noted and appreciated. Your assessment of her character has been valuable to our decision-making process." She turned back to Emma. "Miss Chen, after extensive deliberation, we have reached a decision regarding your request to serve." Emma straightened slightly in her chair, the first sign of tension Steele had seen from her in weeks. "We are going to offer you the opportunity to enlist in the United States Marine Corps," General Hawkins announced. Steele felt a surge of relief and satisfaction. Emma's face remained composed, but he could see a flash of something, gratitude maybe, or vindication, cross her features. "However," the general continued, "your service will be subject to special conditions." "What conditions?" Emma asked. Admiral Richardson, representing the Navy and Special Operations Command, leaned forward. "Given your unique background and exceptional abilities, you will not follow the standard enlisted progression. Instead, you will be fast-tracked through an accelerated training program designed specifically for your skill set. You will attend a shortened version of Marine Corps boot camp," General Hawkins explained, "followed by specialized training with Marine Force reconnaissance. After that, assuming you successfully complete all requirements, you will be considered for integration with Joint Special Operations units." Steele was impressed. Rather than trying to force Emma into a standard military mold, they were creating a path that would utilize her existing skills while ensuring proper military discipline and integration. There will also be ongoing monitoring and evaluation, Agent Mitchell, who had remained part of the Oversight Committee, added. "Not because we distrust you, but because your situation is unprecedented. We need to understand how to best integrate individuals with your background into our military structure." Emma considered this for a moment. Will I be able to serve in combat roles? If you successfully complete all training requirements and demonstrate the necessary judgment and teamwork skills, Admiral Richardson replied. Yes. Your abilities would be wasted in non-combat positions. And my family? Emma asked. Will they continue to be investigated? The active investigation of your family members has been concluded, General Hawkins said. They've been cleared of any security concerns. However, as with any military family, they will remain subject to periodic background updates. Steele watched as Emma processed this information. He could see her weighing the conditions against her desire to serve. General, Emma said finally, I accept your offer. General Hawkins smiled for the first time during the meeting. I hoped you would say that, Miss Chen. Welcome to the United States Marine Corps. She gestured to Colonel Steele. Colonel, you will oversee Miss Chen's initial integration. I'm assigning her to your unit for the preliminary phase of her training. Steele felt a surge of pride and responsibility. Yes, ma'am. It will be an honor. As the meeting concluded and officials began filing out of the room, General Hawkins approached Emma personally. Miss Chen, she said quietly, I want you to understand something. What you've done, coming forward voluntarily with your abilities and background, took tremendous courage. Not everyone in your position would have made that choice. Thank you, General. Your grandfather would be proud, Hawkins continued. He trained you well, but more importantly, he raised you to understand the value of service and sacrifice. That's what makes you valuable to us, not just your shooting ability. Emma's composure finally cracked slightly, and Steele could see emotion welling in her eyes. Thank you, ma'am. That means everything to me. Later, as Steele and Emma walked out of the Pentagon together, Steele reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this point. 6 weeks ago, he had been a career Marine officer going through the motions of a routine civilian demonstration. Now he was responsible for integrating the most uniquely talented recruit in military history. Emma, he said as they reached the parking area, I want you to know that I'm proud to have played a part in this. What you accomplished today, earning the trust and respect of the highest levels of military leadership, is remarkable. Emma looked at him with an expression of deep gratitude. Colonel, none of this would have happened without your willingness to listen and advocate for me. I know I put you in a difficult position. Steele shook his head. You opened my eyes to something I thought I understood but really didn't. Patriotism isn't about where you're born or who your ancestors were. It's about what you're willing to sacrifice for the ideals you believe in. As they parted ways, Steele couldn't help but smile. 6 weeks ago, he had laughed at a young girl's request to try shooting at his range. Now that same girl was about to begin a military career that would likely redefine what was possible for American Special Operations. Emma Chen had broken every record on his firing range. More importantly, she had broken every assumption about what it meant to serve with honor and distinction in the United States military. And Steele had a feeling that this was just the beginning of her story.